So let's get started. I'm going to allow Natasha and Hawan to introduce themselves so that they can tell us about the work that they do and why they're involved in this conversation.
Okay, would you like me to go first, Holly?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Natasha Howard. I'm Library and Knowledge Services Manager at NELT, North East London Elected Foundation Trust. Now, I know many of you don't know me, and some of you are dialing in so you can't see me. I'm not black, I'm mixed race or biracial, so I'm roughly half black Afro-Caribbean and half white English. My mum was born in Jamaica, and in the 70s the government paid for her to come over here to train to be a nurse. She did her training in Bath, and then she went to ethics and midwifery training, and that's where she met my dad. So I've always thought of myself as being half ethics, half Jamaican. I'm descended from enslaved people and their enslavers, but I'm not a spokesperson for black people, that monolithic group that seems to exist in popular imagination. So I want to be upfront about this because we all need to be able to acknowledge the privileges that we have, and I need to acknowledge the privilege, the advantage that comes from having this lighter skin, what some people call proximity to whiteness. And it doesn't end there. My other great privileges include a comfortable upbringing and fantastic education. And we still have grammar schools and ethics, and I passed my 11+, so I went to grammar school, and then I went on to King's College London. Now, partly because of where I grew up, and partly because I'm fortunate to have a wonderful extended family who are very loving, I've never experienced the kind of overt, violent, aggressive racism that many people would think of as being proper racist. But I've always known I was a target. As a child, my dad told me to be careful when we were in shops, keep my hands visible, because people would think I was going to shoplift because I'm brown. Even now, if I go into a shop, I always get a basket. And if I can't get a basket, I walk around like this, like I'm waiting on tables with things in my hand. And I just don't even think about it. When I was 6, my mum told me I'd have to work twice as hard as everyone else to get anywhere because of the colour of my skin. At the time, I really wasn't that bothered because I knew I was a hard worker and I'm fairly bright, so I just got on with it. And for a long time, I naively believed that we lived in a meritocracy and that this hard work would pay off. That our society was post-racial, perhaps there were some pockets of ignorance, but they were very isolated. That started to change when my son was born 6 years ago. He was a few weeks early, and we were kept on the postnatal ward so he could have IV antibiotics twice a day. After we'd been there for a few days, I knew something wasn't right, and I kept asking the white midwives if he was okay. They said he was fine. His nappies were weird, and they said they were normal. It was only when it came to a weekend night shift, and an Indian nurse was staffing the neonatal unit and doing his IV antibiotics, and she said to me, "I think baby's a little bit jaundiced. I've taken a sample to check." And a few hours later, everything kicked off, because the results showed that he was really, really jaundiced, really dehydrated in a bad way. So he was whisked off to the neonatal unit, and it was nearly 2 weeks before I could take him home. Now, that was 6 years ago, and he's fine now. But that's just one example of how racism in healthcare affected outcomes. The concerns of this very articulate, educated woman were repeatedly ignored, and the white staff didn't know how to spot jaundice in non-white babies. So I guess I started to wake up to reality. I started doing more reading, and I realized that I had this duty to leverage my privilege to facilitate change. So I've engaged with my trust's long-standing ethnic minority network, and I'm now an interview panel rep for the network and also strategic ambassador. As we know, librarianship is 97% white. Until our profession reflects the communities we serve, we're not going to be equipped to meet their needs. So it's going to take a while to change those figures, but I think in the meantime, we all have a duty to educate ourselves on EDI issues in the broadest sense and how they manifest in our work, and then we can start to act. So thanks for taking the time to engage with us on this.
Thanks, Natasha. Hong An? Are you there, Hong An? She seems to have disappeared.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Ah, Sorry.
Okay.
I'm Hong An Wing. I am the Library Service Manager at the King's Fund. So I guess I work in a health library, but probably not in the kind of way that most people think about health libraries, because our collection is focused on health and social care policy and management. And so, like Natasha said, and so eloquently said, I think one of the things that is really important for me to clock in my introduction is that this session is about Black Lives Matter, and as you can see, I'm not Black. I would identify as a woman of colour, person of colour, BAME. All of those are like words that I might use to describe myself, depending on the context, or Southeast Asian or Vietnamese, and the kind of experiences of discrimination or othering that I experience are very different to the experiences of Black or Asian or other ethnic minority people. I think it's just really important to kind of highlight that, because I think what Black Lives Matter is really highlighted is that BAME isn't like a monolith. It's an umbrella term that kind of covers a lot of experiences. And for me, how that showed up in my life is that the Southeast Asian community tends to be kind of part of what we call in this country like the model minority. You might have also heard it referred to as like the good immigrant. And so it's this kind of it kind of shows up as like an expectation that you're going to kind of perform really well academically, that you will go into certain professions, so like being a doctor or being a pharmacist or being a lawyer. And I think it's about kind of putting that identity in a box and making expectations of how they perform. But when Black Lives Matter, when it kind of came to the attention of the world again over the past few weeks, one of the things that I really kind of thought about was the way that model minorities are used as a tool of white supremacy, like as a way to kind of as a way to kind of oppress like other minority groups. So again, there is like layers of privilege there that we have to think about. I guess the other thing I want to say is that my experience of talking and thinking and doing stuff around equality, diversity and inclusion, it's informed by my lived experience, but it's really garnered from my professional experience. So I'm involved in a lot of the King's Fund's diversity and inclusion programme. So I co-lead on a lot of the work that we do, and I'm involved in lots of the initiatives. So I'm part of the reverse mentoring programme, and we introduced a positive action graduate trainee post, for example. So yeah, so I guess my disclaimer, as it were, would be that, and I'm sure Natasha would agree with this, is that while we have experience in this field, we don't have all the answers. There is no silver bullet for solving the issues that we're going to be talking about, because if there were, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. So I think it's more to say that we're just sharing our experiences of how our journey has been so far in working in this area.
Thank you. That's great. So what we've done is we've taken the questions that you all asked on Slido, and we've sort of grouped them together thematically, because there were quite a lot of questions that went together nicely. So I'm going to ask Natasha and Hong An these questions, and then they're going to have a discussion. And during that discussion, if you want to make any further questions or comments, please use the chat function. So let's kick off with our first question. How can library staff, regardless of level or role, affect positive change and influence upwards where resistance is being met?
Oh, tricky, isn't it?
This is a really good question, and I'm sure one that both of us really relate to in our experience so far. I guess resistance is often felt downwards, but resistance can be felt in like all directions within an organisation. So it can be felt from your peers, it can be felt from your managers, from directors, senior managers. So what I always think is that everyone is responsible for something, right? You all have a job description, you're all responsible for delivering an element or aspect of your service, making certain decisions about your service. That is power. So you have the power to make decisions that ultimately add up into change, if everyone kind of thinks about their power consciously. So if you're a cataloger, for example, you might have the ability to kind of lead a discussion and lead a piece of thinking about, do the indexing terms we use reflect really the language that's used nowadays around gender identity, around race. You know, that's one thing that you can do. You can't do everything, but the things that you can do are change. So that would be my first thought on this. Natasha, what do you think?
Yes, I think there's some good examples I've seen of training sessions as well. If you're helping people learn to search databases, you can use examples that speak to different aspects, whether they're things to do with race or things to do with issues like domestic violence and that kind of thing. And so just even from including those examples when you're training people, it's just starting to broaden out the thinking a little bit more. The other one I was thinking of is about sharing good practice from elsewhere. Like maybe your boss doesn't want to do it, but there's nothing to stop you talking about what everyone else is doing or someone else is doing. And, you know, if it gets talked about enough, there will be that pressure to do something. Yeah.
And also, I mean, particularly for the NHS, there's an aspect of accountability as well. So, you know, you've got the Workforce Race Equality Standard, which are the measures that you know are applied nationally across the service in terms of measuring race disparity in the NHS. And so there are kind of things that the NHS is required to do, standards that they're required to meet. And so is there any way that you can kind of frame your argument in terms of like this links to a strategic priority? It might link to a strategic priority in the NHS, so you might link it to race data. This is particularly pertinent when you're thinking about workforce, like when you're thinking about the makeup of your team, how people progress, how you support career progression, because the NHS is actually quite diverse, but as you travel up, that diversity doesn't translate in terms of race. And, you know, there are also kind of strategic priorities that your organisation will have, that your trust will have. Your trust will have, I'm pretty sure that all NHS trusts will have like some sort of EDI strategic objectives. And what are those? How can you kind of link it into those? Like, you need to think about all of those things to kind of help make the business case almost. You kind of have to treat everything like it's a business case, because the moral case alone sometimes won't win the day. So sometimes you have to put your librarian hat and do a bit of research and say, here's the data, this is why we should do it. So there's lots of data out there, for example, about why not diversifying your workforce will result in, you know, a less rich pool of talent, and then that has an economic impact on your organisation. You need to kind of, put your research hat on and find what the kind of data is and what the argument is to do this kind of thing, whatever the change is.
Another one I was going to suggest is about if your trust has an ethnic minority or a black staff network, it might be useful to link in with them, because as Hong Ang says, there's strategic priorities around these issues. You know, if your chair of your BAME network is saying, where's the EDI stuff in the library, that's going to perhaps carry a bit more weight than you saying it to your boss, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good shout, definitely. Yeah, find your peers in your organisation, find your supporters. Like, if you're trying to do things and you're meeting resistance, you're not the only one who's trying to make this change. So you need to try and find the other people and join up and be strategic about it. Yeah. So if, for example, you want to kind of diversify your collection, but, you know, there are budget constraints and there's a bit of resistance being met about it, can you argue that it's good for staff well-being? Can you argue that it links into kind of like greater thinking around health inequalities and how that interacts with race inequality? And that's actually quite an important dimension to think about, because at a health policy level, that's something that people are starting to think about. You know, you need to kind of cast your net quite broadly.
That's great. I think that's a lot of practical steps that people can take to start thinking about how they affect that positive change upwards. I don't think we've got anything that's come through on the chat on that topic, so should we move on to our next question?
Yeah.
So, and this has been a big one, we had lots of discussion about this on Slido. What does it mean to decolonise a library in a healthcare context?
Okay, so decolonisation, as I understand it, is about sort of changing the focus from things that have been largely built and designed around cisgender, white, cisgender male, white people, and making things, more diverse. So in a healthcare library, I think there's lots of ways that we can do it. We can talk about collections, but we've also talked about the training aspects as well, raising awareness through those kind of examples. And the things that we've got on there about the lack of diversity of images and stuff, that's really topical at the moment. I don't know if people have seen on Twitter, there is a student at St George's University of London who has written a book about recognising clinical signs in black and brown skin. He's done it as part of a student project. He's a medical student, and this is being hailed as a big thing because it's a first over here at least. And that's kind of incredible when you think about it, but this should be down to the unpaid labour of a medical student to produce this kind of resource. But these are the kind of things that we're thinking of. These pictures, these resources should be more available. And when we say decolonise, we're not just talking about the race agenda, we're talking about gender, we're talking about LGBTQ issues as well, and which have a knock-on effect in health and health outcomes. So it's really thinking widely, interrogating our collections, what voices are being heard, what voices aren't being heard, and in the collections and in the terms that we use, as Hong Yang said earlier, the index terms that we use as well, to organise those.
Yeah, I think the example that you use of the medical student who's put together this resource, I mean, that absolutely shouldn't be something that someone has taken on as unpaid labour. And I guess my challenge to us as a profession is, as a profession, we have significant economic power when it comes to publishers, for example. What could we do to affect change as a whole profession of healthcare librarians when we're thinking about what's missing? So we know that in dermatology, there's no diversity in how skin conditions show up on different colour skins because they do present differently. A really pertinent example of this at the moment is in COVID, actually. So one of the symptoms of COVID is a rash. About 20% of COVID patients present with this. But all the examples, like the majority of the examples, photographic examples we have of how this rash looks is on white skin. There are very little photographic examples of how this looks on Asian skin, on black skin. And so it looks different, and this might be a crucial thing that is being missed in a certain section of the population, and we already know that outcomes in COVID for particular ethnic groups is very different than it is in white groups. So actually the COVID tracking app that is developed by Zoe is one that is being used quite a lot in the UK at the moment. I'm sure a lot of people on this call track their data every day on it. They put out a call for people to send in pictures if they had experienced the rash and weren't from a Caucasian background, and so we could have examples of that. So yeah, it has kind of real world consequences, this kind of stuff. And what Natasha said as well about it applying to kind of other characteristics as well. So for anyone who's read like the Caroline Criado Perez book, Invisible Women, there's quite a lot there about how medical research has historically erased women from a lot of trials, and consequently our medical model of understanding some conditions is based on how it presents in men, for example. So again, it's about that kind of real world consequence. So I think for us as healthcare librarians, as information professionals, we need to get ahead of the curve, right? We need to understand where the gaps in our knowledge are and be conscious of that, and think about that, bear that in mind when we carry out literature searches, when we think about our collections. You know, that's on us to be conscious of that.
That's great. Thank you. We've actually had a really good question. And Shakira has shared the information on the Mind the Gap book that you were talking about from St George's. If you were interested in that, we can add that link into our resources list, actually, can't we?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
That would be great.
So Camilla has asked, when we do literature searches on, e.g. dermatological conditions in darker skin, sometimes it seems that there is very little research or no research. Is there an organisation or somewhere we can report these research gaps to? Somewhere that is able to pass on the message that more research is needed on X, Y, and Z?
Wow, it's a good, there is a place. Yeah, it's a great question. We should try and find out. I wonder if there is.
Yeah, I wonder if NIHR is a good place to report that. So that's the National Institute for Health Research. They're the main funding body for NHS research, and they give out grants for research conducted in the NHS. And I think one of their remits is to try and correct like gaps in the knowledge, in the evidence. So that might be one that comes to mind, but that's definitely something we should go away and look at, and we might add that to the reading list.
I'm wondering if some of the, like, some more, say, like Runnymede Trust or whatever might have some ideas as well. Yeah, some of those, like that, it's a think tank, isn't it? So, yeah, that's a really good question. Good action to take away.
Yeah, and we're really well placed to kind of spot that kind of thing and report it.
Sorry, just flicking back and forth through the chat and I'm muting myself. There's been another suggestion here from Suzanne Wilson. She says the James Lind Alliance, and she's put the link in, which we will add to our resources pack. Thank you, Suzanne. That's really useful. Okay, should we move on to our next question? So, how can libraries promote their EDI collections and encourage engagement with this topic through the resources that they provide?
So this is a great question. And I think, you know, I don't think it's a case of doing anything extra over and above what you already do in your services and in the services that you provide. It's about rethinking all of those activities you do with a different lens, thinking about it through the EDI lens. And so, like, Natasha's already given a great example of this in terms of like thinking about training. You know, like, could you, if you host a journal club, for example, could you use that journal club model and use it to host discussions around diversity, where you could use not only like clinical research, but you could use maybe like a think piece that is about an aspect of diversity and inclusion that you think it's really useful to have a conversation about. And so you give people that reading, and then it's up to you. You have the physical space, and you can kind of host the space to have that discussion, because one, that kind of provides lifelong learning, continuous learning opportunities, which is, you know, that's our jam, that's what we do. And it's continuing to engage people with your service who maybe they don't need to use the library in their day-to-day job, but this is, like, again, proving that this service, this library, can be relevant to their professional development in a different way.
Yeah, yes, I really like that lifelong learning idea, and I think that's the question that was specifically about Black History Month and stuff. I think sometimes we sort of think, oh, you know, Black History Month or Pride Month, is it really relevant to what we're doing? Well, actually, I think these are things that many of us need to learn more about, and it will benefit us not just in our work, but in our home lives as well. So I think it's a really good opportunity to have those conversations. And also, you know, it can be fun as well. It doesn't have to be really serious, you know. The one about activity ideas for Black History Month, well, yeah, you could get people to read, but you could also get people to watch a film, or, you know, a podcast, that kind of thing, and have a comedy sketch even and have a discussion about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point about, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be po-based. So we had Pride Week at the Fund recently, and one thing we did was to host a quiz, but the quiz was like an educational quiz, so all the questions were centered around LGBT history. So it was educational as well as being a social activity.
And the other one, was it one of the questions about encouraging engagement and encouraging people to join in? One of the phrases that our ethnic minority network uses is when they're opening events out to everybody. We did this yesterday. They said we would like attendance to reflect the makeup of the organisation. So we want 60% white staff, 40% BAME. And they pretty much got it. Pretty much the stats, they were doing a Slido on it. Yeah, so I think sometimes people think things aren't for them. So you have to, that's something we're doing in the recruitment, isn't it? You know, making it obvious we want applications from underrepresented groups, and it's the same for these kind of activities as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Natasha, is that often, like, EDI stuff can kind of attract a certain crowd. It can either attract people who, you know, they're attracted to it because it reflects their lived experience, and so, you know, people want to get involved because it is really about directly influencing change to make their own experience of the workplace better. Or it can be people who are kind of, you know, really allied to the cause and quite active, and or really quite active in that space. And I think for people who are newer to the conversation, it can feel scary to join that, when there might be a gap in where they are on their journey and where other people are on their journey. And, you know, often people don't want to get involved in stuff like this because they're scared of saying the wrong thing, or they're scared that it's not a space for them. So being really explicit about what we expect is really important, and saying, you know, we expect everyone to get involved in this because this is a problem not only for Black and brown people to solve, it's a problem for everyone to solve.
I think that links in really well to another question we had that isn't on the slide around being an ally. So somebody had recently taken part in ally training provided by the Trust LGBTQ+ network, and they wondered what your thoughts were on staff becoming an ally.
Oh, that's really timely question, because we the call I was talking about just now was for our ethnic minority network and allies, and I think it can be really powerful as long as we're clear on what the ask is. One of the slides we had on the call yesterday was what an ally is not, or what you mustn't do, and then there was another slide with all the things to do. And I've heard this from our LGBTQ network. When they launched their ally scheme, they gave everybody this nice little badge, and they've sort of shown now, a few months on, it's not just about the badge, we actually need people to do stuff. So one good thing on our call yesterday is we had all our senior integrated care directors and our chief executive even making pledges about things that they are going to do to demonstrate their allyship. And so they're going to be held accountable by the network, by the organisation, for the things they said on the call yesterday. One thing we haven't got on the reading list that we should add, Yvonne Coghill, who was with the Res team, I'm not sure if she still is, but she's still obviously operating in this area. She just did a 7 A's of allyship slide thing that's been going around on Twitter that was really good. It's just on one page. We should add that to the reading list. Actions.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think the key thing for me in terms of allyship is that it needs to be active allyship. Allyship to kind of signal that you're for the cause is great, but we need to go on further. We need white people to step up and actually help us push this boulder up the hill, because if it's only people from an ethnic minority background pushing that boulder up the hill, then, you know, if you think about it, you're perpetuating the same problem. It's unpaid labour, it's work on an underrepresented group to fix the problems that have been created by a dominant group. So allyship can look like a lot of different things. Yeah, it can look like personal commitment. It can look like, you know, being the person to take on the difficult conversations so that your colleague from an ethnic minority background doesn't have to. If someone has said something in a meeting that, you know, doesn't sit well with you, maybe that's like a really great thing you can do, is to kind of call that out, so that it's less of a fraught conversation for the person who has the least power in that situation. So it's just about thinking about what you can do. One of the questions on the slide is about, you know, are there good examples of trust implementing training where people can feel the lived experiences of staff? I'd say another kind of really important thing you can do as an ally is to not rely on people having to kind of mine some of their traumatic experiences so that you can learn. There's a lot out there already. You know, there are talented authors, podcasters, screenwriters, actors who have all kind of created stuff that help you understand what that lived experience is like. It's a tough ask to ask your colleagues to share that, because it can be risky, you know, like if you experience the workplace in a different way and then you're being asked to kind of disclose how different that is and how bad that is for you, that's a really tough place to be put in. And just to say, yeah, one thing that I've added to the reading list is that the King's Fund have recently published a piece of research which includes some data of that ilk, but it's anonymised, so that helps give you a flavour, but there is plenty out there that's written on this, and specifically in the NHS context as well.
Just a couple of things I would add there, Hong Yang, is we shouldn't be asking our colleagues to relive their horrible experiences, but if you're going to pay somebody who does this for a living to, you know, facilitate those conversations or to interpret that for you, then there are several good people out there who can have those conversations and take that because they're paid to do it rather than your staff having to do it. The other one is I just recently came across it, and it's on the reading list, this thing called HexiTime. I don't know if people have seen it. It's like a time banking thing, and they're running a campaign about supporting BAME colleagues. So several of my white, actually mostly male colleagues have signed up for that this week, to offer to do things like interview coaching and mentoring for more junior or newly qualified allied health professionals, for example. So that might be something you think that you could do, and also be outside your work as well, you know, actually. And so nobody can stop you from doing it if you want to offer to mentor or give interview and practice for somebody.
Thank you. I think you've kind of gone into some of these examples that this next question has asked, but Richard has said, what does it mean to help? As an old white middle class guy, I'm aware I don't want to patronise or mansplain to people. What concrete things can I do?
I think the fact that you know the word mansplain means that you're on the right lines there. I don't know. One thing that I always appreciate when my older white colleagues do that is when they say my name when I'm not there, or when they reference work that I've done, or bring me into a conversation about something I can help with. Perhaps there's people you can do that for.
Yeah. Like I said before, you can be the person to have the difficult conversation too. So harking back to one of the earlier questions about resistance, if people are trying to make change about something, chances are that as a white white man, people might listen to you more than they do to other people, than they do to a woman of colour. So, you know, you can utilise your privilege for good.
Thanks both, that was great. Okay, so this is a big topic as well actually, it came up. What should library collections relating to equality, diversity and inclusion, or BAME groups be called? What language would be most appropriate and least offensive?
So we put some stuff on the reading list about the different terms, haven't we, Hong-Ang? Because there's a lot to unpick with them.
Yeah, there is. We've actually been having this conversation quite a lot at Fund recently. Partially, I think, because we've realised that one of the reasons why the consequence of us having historically not done that much work about it is that we don't have the confidence to talk about it because we feel like we don't have the language, and language is so often a barrier in terms of people trying to get involved in this because people don't want to offend. So, like, I think the key thing here is that this is not going to be very helpful, but there is no right or wrong. So I'm fine with the term BAME being used. Other people aren't. I'm okay with it being used in certain contexts. So I think where you use terms, you have to use them meaningfully and ensure that you've put some thought into it. So BAME is okay if what you mean is actually Black, Asian and ethnic minority. BAME is not okay if you are only referring to a few of those groups, for example. I think language is loaded and it just means that it means something different to everyone else. So I think as long as you make the decision and you've done your research and you're able to say why you've made that decision, that is the best approach to this. So an example is at the Fund we use capital B for Black, and we had a discussion about why that is, and because, you know, Black is not, it's not an ethnicity, but there is a political dimension to it in terms of it's, you know, it's a social construct that is recognised, so it is used with a capital B, but there's also a discussion about whether you should also capitalise the W in white. And the capital W in white is sometimes associated with white supremacy, but then also if you don't capitalise it, then it plays into that whole thing of like white people not recognising that they are also holders of race. Race is not only held by people who aren't white. So it's really complex and messy, but just do your research and figure out where you fall on it and why you've made those decisions, so that if you get called out on it, if people want to know why you've made that decision, you can have a meaningful conversation about it.
Thank you. I don't know if Natasha, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I suppose I might just say something about the question saying about collections related to EDI or BAME groups, and I think I like the idea more of having an EDI collection because you know, we're thinking about this holistically. We're thinking about all trying to think about all the protected characteristics, and it would be nice to make sure you have stuff covering all of those different label groups as well. And I don't know, maybe it depends on how big your collection is. Maybe I don't think I'd have enough to have separate reading lists for all the collections. maybe for all the characteristics, so maybe just do one.
I think that's a really good point as well, because it takes into that idea of intersectionality as well. So, you know, we should be thinking about all the characteristics, and all these different characteristics don't sit in silos, you know. So it's really important to, yeah, think about it holistically.
Fab. Right, we have some chat going on here, and some of these relate a bit back to some of the previous questions. So I'm just going to go through them as they've cropped up, okay? So William has asked, would you like diversity engagement assessed by health education systems, for example, as part of the quality impact outcome framework assessment?
Are we thinking about equality and diversity of library knowledge services as part of the new, is that what we're saying?
I think so. It's
Yeah.
not been specified whether it's workforce or library services, but I suppose either or both.
Well, I think we in the refresh of the knowledge for healthcare, we've got diversity is much more explicit in there in the new driver diagrams and things. I'm not sure. As a library, with my library manager hat on, I think the quality improvement outcomes is big enough as it is. And the other thing is, like Hong An sort of saying, we shouldn't be doing any new stuff. This stuff should become mainstream and should be part of, the way that we make sure that our collections are comprehensive and addressing all the relevant issues for our organisations. Yeah, that I got out.
No, I don't think so. I think it depends. So I think it depends on how we want to encourage libraries to pay attention to this. So one way to do it is through that means. I don't work in an NHS library, so I have no idea of what it means to kind of do the quality framework assessment. And what that might add if we add that in it. But I think there are other ways to try and encourage people, like libraries, to pay attention to D&I in their services. It doesn't just have to be through this. And if it was included, it shouldn't be only through that either.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I attended some training yesterday actually on the legalities of equality, diversity and human rights, and they made a really interesting point that we can be using our equality impact assessments on things like developing new teaching programs to ensure that we're checking that everything is inclusive and we've explored all options when we're doing those things. So that might be something to think about for us as well. Okay, back to the chat. There's lots of things going on. So Shakira has said, how do we navigate these conversations with colleagues? As a Black woman, I almost anticipate ignorant comments and don't feel it is my duty to emotionally drain myself. Should this be more involved?
No, I think you need to, my priority, I think, is you need to look after yourself. If you don't feel you can do it in the moment or ever, then I don't think it's for you to take it on. I don't think. I'm talking to some older colleagues from BAME groups. I was having a conversation with I don't think she's on the call today, but she was sort of saying, we were doing this work 20 years ago in libraries, then it kind of dropped off, and now it's come back, and she's like, I just want to get on with my job. And so I think it's for those who have the energy right now. Me and Hong An have got a bit of energy right now to do this work, and then maybe we'll step back and some other people will take it up in a couple of years. I'm sorry you have to anticipate those comments. It's just draining, because I think, speaking for myself, I don't want to be talking about this. I just like to get on with my life and just be me. But we can't get away from it, and yeah.
Yeah, I would totally agree. You need to make the best decision for you, and if you don't want to engage in those conversations, don't. If the emotional burden of it is too much, if it takes away from you progressing in your career, using time for your own career progression, for other things in your life that are valuable, no, don't do it. I think I saw a tweet the other day which was about kind of imagine all like the great Black writers, if they weren't if racism didn't exist, what would their work be about? But as it is, they had to devote their intellectual energy to writing about this stuff. You do not have to devote your energy to that. If you want to, then that's great. But as we've said before, the push is not for, it's for everyone to pick up this baton. And no one can do this work indefinitely. And yeah, like Natasha, this is not necessarily what I want to be spending my time on, but here we are. What I will say is that it's not like I don't get anything from this work. So it's been really developmental for me being involved in this work. It's really helped me to build skills and stuff that maybe I wouldn't have gotten the chance to at this point in my career in a library role. So my ability to kind of influence upwards has really been honed by being involved in EDI work. In thinking kind of really strategically, for example, I probably wouldn't be able to do that unless I got up to the next rung of the ladder in my career. So there are benefits, but it's up to you to decide what the trade-off is between like your emotional and mental health, because it is draining, and whether you want to kind of progress your career in that way and through this channel.
Yeah, so I'll just come in again there, Hong, just to echo that, what you're saying. The work that I'm starting to do now with the Ethnic Minority Network, being a strategic ambassador, means, you know, I'm in contact with all these much senior members of staff who I'm learning heaps from and really enjoying getting to know them as well. The other thing, we're talking about careers, is that it's only in the last couple of years I've started talking about these issues, and that's because I've been around for a long time now. I'm at that stage in my career where I feel comfortable to talk about these issues. When I was first qualified in my first job, I wouldn't have wanted to go there, and it might have been unwise to have gone there. Whereas now, I'm not that I'm untouchable, but it's just a bit more, perhaps a bit more with age as well, at ease with myself, I guess. The other thing I was saying, you were saying about what you get out of it, and I've said this to you, Hong Yang, before, is that I do feel when I do this work, it's one of the ways that I like it, that I honour the ancestors and really just be thankful for the fact that, you know, people who went through hideous times, you know, I'm here and I'm able to do bits to try and make things better for those who are coming after us. So I do get something out of it, yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you, Shakira, for the question. I think that's really powerful, and certainly personally that makes me feel like I should be paying more attention to pick up when those things are happening so I can step in for my colleagues. That's definitely on my action list from now on. And Shakira has said thank you as well. She says, thanks for your responses. I'm sure many people of colour in libraries are outnumbered, so it can be a daunting task.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just quickly, we've had some great links from Sue Lacey Bryan on writing styles, so we will link those as well. And it also says, we're absolutely committed in Knowledge for Healthcare to build, grow and develop a diverse and inclusive library and knowledge services workforce. But then William does mention, and this is absolutely true, I guess diversity isn't mentioned once in the quality impact outcome framework, so perhaps even if it isn't assessed, it should be mentioned. I think that's a really important point, and I will take back to my colleagues. Thank you, William. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to unmute you all. So if you can just make sure you've muted yourself so we're not suddenly inundated with background information. And then you can ask questions if you want to using the hand up function. Okay, here we go. If you can just mute yourselves, please. Anybody want to ask a question, please put your hand up. I don't see any hands coming up just yet. You can also still use the chat if you want to ask questions or make comments about the things that we've been discussing today. Otherwise, let me just scroll down the list. Oh, I've got a hand. Bertha, I'm just going to come to you. I'm going to unmute you. Bertha, please ask your question.
Hi. Well, rather, instead of a question, I just wanted to share things that we have been doing here at MSc at Southend. So I started this job in February 2019. And when I first started, one of the first things was to get involved with different groups, just to attend to the meetings. I attended to the FACE group and I attended to the BAME group. So when I attended to the BAME group, I found out that there was so much work that we could contribute. And from then, we started this diversity collection here. And more recently, we started this inclusion and diversity bulletin, which has been well received. So I think for me, just sharing my experience is we need to be curious what's going on, what's around there. You know, as librarians, we think of doctors and nurses, but there is managers, there are porters, there is so much going on. And if we are not curious to find out what are their lives and how we can serve them, then it's all these things going, hanging around. So I don't feel myself, I am not BAME, but if you see my face and if you hear my voice, then you know that I'm not a white British. But where I come from, I'm a white privileged person. I'm from Mexico. And in that context is how I learn about my privilege. And I still hold this privilege here because at some point I just shut down. But I noticed that if I shut down, then I don't learn. And yeah, so this is what I wanted to share with you.
That's wonderful, thank you. And I think your point about curiosity is so important. It's a really important trait for our profession in general, but yeah, especially for this, it's about being curious about how other people's lives are different from yours. Other people have different viewpoints, other people have different experiences. They're not all necessarily bad, but they are different. And just having that understanding to broaden your worldview is so important for this.
Yeah, thanks, Bertha. I did actually mean to, I don't know if we did put it on the reading list. We were going to flag up your bulletin, if that's okay. But that's a resource that people might want to read for themselves or to to subscribe and forward to other colleagues in their organisation who do wonderful share things.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a question. This is a good question from the chat, from an anonymous person. Our manager is very concerned about us doing anything which seems political. Do you have any suggestions for helping to affirm that this is not politics but essential work for the library?
Oh, tricky, because I think it is political, isn't it? I think the NHS is inherently political, unfortunately. That's not helpful, though, for the question. Can we bring it back to thinking about, like we said earlier on, about the health inequalities, about the social determinants, that kind of aspect, how it ties into prevention, those kind of things? I mean, I think, yeah, libraries aren't neutral, and I think, you know, if you don't take a stance, you know, you're on the side of the oppressors. You know, I think people should be taking a stance that's pro-equality and pro-social justice, and I appreciate that's hard to articulate to a manager. Yeah.
So I think it depends on how comfortable you feel with having a one-to-one conversation with this manager, but I don't think they mean political. I think that's a coded word. I think that what they're really saying is, I don't really feel comfortable with this, or I don't really get what this is about. One of the most important things in this work is to utilise your personal relationships, because you know, there is so much fear and uncertainty that people hold around this work. So actually using your personal relationship, having those one-to-one chats, they can become a really safe space to help people to understand things that maybe they don't have space to talk about elsewhere. So yeah, I think if you can feel comfortable to have that conversation and say to them, you know, what do you mean by political? Why is that necessarily bad? Why is it out of our remit? This is the way I see it. See what happens out of that conversation, because, yeah, I don't think they mean political.
Thank you. That is tough, and it's something, and I think you just have to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
So Bertha said we can share the bulletin, which is great. We will definitely do that. I'm going to come to Trisha now and just unmute you because she's got her hand up. Hang on, let me just do some scrolling. So, Trisha.
Sorry, Holly, my doorbell's going. I'm sorry. I'll be back in a second.
No worries.
I'm just wondering how far we should be also including other people, the underserved. So there are white sections of society who are discriminated against because of where they live or how they speak. And also, I just want to make the point, we need to be quite careful about the language we use. You know, people still use quite a lot of unacceptable language, say, like pikey or chav or something like that, and people use it without even thinking about it. And I was just having a discussion with somebody today at work about this aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'll just recap for Natasha, who's just come back. So Tricia had a point about, you know, thinking about other underrepresented groups. So thinking about kind of, you know, groups that are socioeconomic disadvantaged, for example. I think this is why it's important to take an intersectional approach to this. There's an Audre Lorde quote that I love, which is around, you know, we don't live single issue lives, and intersectionality is about that. You know, if we take up the cause of race equality, then we're also taking up the cause of LGBT equality too, of gender equality, of classism, ableism. You know, all those things are intertwined. All oppression is connected. So our approach to that should also be connected and holistic. So yeah, absolutely, that's essential for us to think about as well. But also, all oppression is connected, but they're all also distinct. So they all need slightly different approaches to. Everyone experiences slightly different challenges as well.
Thank you. Got a few more things coming up on the chat. In related to the previous question about managers who think this is too political, Helen has said that her trust is very anxious to take this on, and at every meeting and at every level we are being asked to consider Black Lives Matter. I think it's less politically risky than it used to be. So maybe it goes back to that point you mentioned right at the beginning, Hong An, about, or was it Natasha, sorry, about finding case studies from other organisations of what they're doing and why it's been so good for their service.
Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of great practice going on out there.
And a suggestion rather than a question. Yvonne is saying she's currently reading an excellent book. She's learned a lot, and she's only a few chapters in, called "Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race" by Renee Eddy Lodge, which I think is on your reading list, is it not?
I believe it's on the reading list. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we've got that on our reading list, and also a couple of others as well, which are kind of, if you're interested in kind of continuing your reading journey around that, there's more stuff like that on there.
Okay, I can't see any more hands up. Apologies if I've missed you. And it is 3 o'clock now, and there aren't any more questions on the chat. So I think we will wrap this up if that's okay, unless either of you want to make any more comments before we go.
No, just thanks to everyone for joining in and engaging with us on this. It's been a good way to spend a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for hosting this chat, and also for everyone who's come along and contributed. And yeah, if you have any other questions, you know, please do get in touch with us. We'd be more than happy to have a chat or answer any other questions.
Yeah, definitely. So we have been discussing this, and we think that this is probably the beginning of this sort of learning webinar discussion piece, where we will talk about how health libraries should respond to other people perhaps within the protected characteristics. So that would be interesting. We'd be really interested to hear from you. And we will be publishing this webinar as a recording and its transcript, our list of resources, which we've been talking about all session, and a blog post about it as well in the next few weeks. So please keep an eye out for that. And the other thing I'd really appreciate is if when you receive your evaluation form, please fill it in. There'll be a section there for you to make a pledge. I think we've all some actions to take away from today about the things that we can do going forward. And so it'd be great to see some of those from you. And Natasha and Hong An, thank you so much for taking the time out today to answer those questions and to just give us just much needed space to have this discussion.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for expertly hosting as well, Holly.
Yeah.
Bless you. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll just leave that there. Thank you, everyone, and happy Friday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.